1920s culture. America during this time is clearly going to become a consumer society, which means advertising is going to become an even bigger deal. You see advertisements in newspapers, billboards, streetcar signs, junk mail, radio, movies. And the thing is, these different companies very much wanted to create basically a single market where everyone, regardless of your age, your religion, your ethnicity, your race, you all want to consume so-and-so name brand product. A lot of advertisements were about making like the old taste obsolete and show the like new convenience of this new brand. Or they would link the brand to fashion or status or sex appeal. And so we're going to see over time the home is going to become really the focus of consumerism. And actually the housewife's role is going to start to be redefined during this time period as basically the consumer who is purchasing all the goods for the entire family. Keep in mind, during this time period with a shifting labor market, this means that a lot of people do have a bit more money and time for like leisure and consumption. And actually with these advertisements, consumption really was seen as the only reward for like factory workers. And so advertisers would claim like, oh, buy this product, it'll fill you with self-respect and it'll just give you fulfillment in life. We see a lot of advertisements would talk about consumerism as a sign of like social status, especially for working women. That, oh, if you can afford this product, then you must be like a true working woman kind of thing. Consumption, therefore, is increasingly displacing a lot of traditional virtues of thrift and avoidance of debt. We get more and more installment buying that becomes actually common during this decade. And this means personal debt is rising about twice as fast as incomes were during this time period. We also get our entertainment of this time period. Movie theaters a lot of times would try to set common values amongst the population. I mean, think about that a lot of times movies are what set the trends in dress and language and behavior. The radio does this as well. It incorporates listeners basically into a national market, and you get standardized entertainment personalities across the nation. Think of like Ryan Seacrest kind of personalities today. We get the phonograph. Now people can listen to music of their choice in their own home. And on top of that, record companies would promote big dance crazes like the Charleston to try to boost up sales. We see like the popularity of trumpet player Louis Armstrong and other jazz greats give this decade the nickname the Jazz Age. And that's the thing, jazz really was from an African American musical tradition. And so the Great Migration spread jazz across the nation. Of course, some people condemned it, partly because, oh, it was African American in its background, but others would condemn it because they feared, oh, it would undermine conventional restraints on behavior because it differed from like older and more formal music previously. Generally, people don't like change, unfortunately. Sports. We get professional sports become a lot more commercialized, especially with like baseball parks. And then you get your big players like Babe Ruth of the New York Yankees was in himself a commercial commodity because he was a baseball player that people knew across the nation. And so he would endorse products like Cadillacs or alligator shoes. But we see other sports gaining more prominence during this time. Boxing gained a lot of following. College football started attracting people who had no interest in higher education. And then you get things like aviator Charles Lindbergh flew alone across the Atlantic in 1927 in the spirit of St. Louis. And actually, Time magazine named him their first Man of the Year. The thing is, we've got all of this promotion of consumption, and there's an element of immediate gratification, not as much as like today and everything, but this all weakens some of those traditional values of like self-restraint, and instead is feeding into the desire of like personal fulfillment. Another way we see this is like sexual pleasure becomes a lot more open and objective because birth control is starting to become a little bit more readily available. And so this means women can enjoy sex without the fear of pregnancy. During the 20s, we're going to see things like divorce rates go up, cigarette consumption goes up, hymnlines go up, whereas respect for parents and elders and clergy generally went down. And so we have this kind of new morality during this decade. And nothing embodied that new morality more than young people and the so-called flapper. The thing is, as much as we act like this was a new morality and it was such a stark difference between before the 20s, the change actually wasn't really that new, and it certainly wasn't as widespread as a lot of advocates or critics believed. There were already signs about these things before the Great War when it came to like fashion, like hemlines were already starting to creep up before the Great War. Social values were already starting to change. I mean, think about some of the progressive era and how that could feed into this. And generally, most people in the 20s still adhered to traditional beliefs and values. And you can see this in things like there was actual laws on women's hemlines for their dresses during this time period as well. So, thinking about all these changes in culture, I want you to think about and make note of how does that affect us today?